Do you really believe a man like me has nothing worth showing? The words cut through the hum of laughter, clinking glasses and piano strings still faintly vibrating from the last song played that night. Thomas's voice was low, steady, yet it had that weight of someone who had carried years of silence, each word sharpened not by anger, but by truth. Eleanor, dressed in emerald silk that shimmered under the grand chandelier, turned toward him with the kind of slow, amused look only the rich and certain could manage. She sipped her champagne delicately, her diamond earrings swaying as she tilted her head. "You clean floors for a living," she said, her voice like velvet wrapping around steel. "And you think you can touch that?" She nodded toward the Bösendorfer Imperial grand piano, sitting under its own private spotlight like a jewel. The small circle of guests began to murmur. The room was golden with warmth and wealth, walls lined with gilded frames, tables set with crystal, and people dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Thomas. Faded work shirt, sleeves rolled halfway up, calloused hands still smelling faintly of polish from the floors he'd been cleaning just moments ago. "You've never heard me play," he said simply. "I don't need to," Eleanor replied, a sharp smile curling her lips. "Some things in life are obvious." She glanced around, catching the eyes of the crowd now leaning in, their curiosity piqued. "But let's make this fun. If you can sit at that piano and play something, anything that actually makes me feel something real." She paused, letting the tension stretch, her smile widening. "I'll marry you." The laughter came instantly, like a ripple across still water. Someone near the bar laughed so hard they nearly spilled their drink. The absurdity of it was delicious to them, something to gossip about later. Thomas didn't smile. "And if I don't?" "Then you go back to mopping floors and I go back to my evening," Eleanor said, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. Simple enough. The man in the charcoal grey suit standing beside her chuckled, swirling the champagne in his glass. "Eleanor, this is cruel." She didn't look at him. "Cruel? No. Entertaining. Definitely." A few more people moved closer. The air was shifting, the casual chatter giving way to the electric hum of a challenge. Thomas set the mop aside, leaning it against the wall with deliberate care. His shoes made no sound as he crossed the marble floor, each step unhurried. The room's laughter softened into whispers. He's actually going to do it. This is going to be embarrassing. Watch. He'll freeze after the first note. Thomas reached the piano. He didn't sit immediately. He stood there for a moment, eyes on the keys as though they were something sacred, something to be asked permission from before touching. Then, slowly, he lowered himself onto the bench. Eleanor's voice carried across the space. 3 minutes, janitor, impress me." Thomas closed his eyes. For a moment there was nothing but the quiet breathing of the crowd. The first note was soft, so soft it might have been missed if not for the way it seemed to settle into the silence. The second came richer, warmer, followed by a cascade of notes that began to weave themselves into something more than sound. It was a melody that didn't ask for attention. It took it each chord seemed to reach somewhere deeper than the ear, telling a story without words. There was longing in it, yes, but also hope, the kind of hope that hurts because it's been earned. His left hand built a steady, rolling foundation, his right hand spilling light over it in patterns that rose and fell like breath. People had stopped shifting. Glasses were lowered. The hired pianist in the far corner tilted his head, eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but in recognition of something rare. Eleanor, for the first time, felt her composure waver. She told herself it was just the wine, just the novelty of the situation. But the truth was, this man, this janitor, was playing with a soul she hadn't expected to find in anyone tonight, least of all him. The music swelled, then softened, then swelled again, until it felt as though the whole room was holding its breath. When the final note faded into silence, no one clapped. It wasn't the kind of silence that begged for applause. It was the kind that didn't dare break something fragile. Eleanor's voice was quieter now. "Where did you learn that?" Thomas looked at her, his hands still resting on the keys. "From the only person who ever believed I could." The man in the charcoal suit leaned forward. "Play another." Eleanor's spine straightened. She needed to regain control of this. "Yes," she said. but not something you've rehearsed 100 times. Play Rachmaninoff. Prelude in C-sharp minor. A sharp murmur passed through the guests. The hired pianist shook his head slightly, whispering to no one in particular. That's not a request, it's a trap. Thomas didn't argue. He adjusted his position, set his fingers, and began. The opening chords struck like thunder, deep, powerful, reverberating through the very floor. His body leaned into the force of the music, each note precise yet brimming with emotion. The transitions were flawless, his hands a blur, yet every sound was deliberate, every pause a breath drawn at the perfect moment. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. She had chosen the piece to watch him fail, to watch him stumble and shrink under the weight of something too great. Instead, she watched him command it, not with arrogance, but with an understanding that made the music feel alive. By the final crashing chord, the silence that followed was no longer disbelief. It was reverence. Thomas rose. He didn't bow. He didn't look for approval. He simply walked back toward where his mop leaned against the wall. "Wait," Eleanor said before she could stop herself. He turned, one eyebrow slightly raised. "You could have been someone," she said, her voice softer now. Thomas's faint smile didn't reach his eyes. "I am someone." He picked up the mop and returned to his work. The mop slid back and forth across the marble in slow, steady arcs, each pass erasing the faint footprints left by guests who still stood in small clusters, murmuring about what they had just witnessed. Eleanor was one of them, except she wasn't talking, she was watching. Her laughter from earlier felt far away now, swallowed by something she didn't want to name. Curiosity? Regret? Maybe both. The billionaire hosting the gala, Arthur Kensington, a man who rarely remembered the names of those who worked for him, approached Thomas with an expression no one had seen on his face before. "Thomas," he said slowly, "how long have you been working here?" 8 years, Thomas replied without looking up. Arthur hesitated. "And you never told anyone you could play like that?" Thomas wrung out the mop and moved to the next section of floor. "Some things," he said quietly, "aren't for show." Eleanor stepped forward before she could think better of it. "Who taught you?" she asked. For a moment Thomas didn't answer. Then he leaned the mop against the wall and straightened, meeting her eyes. "My mother. She was a housekeeper for a wealthy family like me. They had an old piano in the back parlor no one used. When I was 5, I'd sit in the corner while she cleaned, and she'd show me where to put my fingers. We couldn't afford lessons, so we learned together. She'd hum a tune, and I'd find it on the keys." Eleanor's throat tightened. "She passed when I was 17, he continued, his voice calm but carrying the weight of something too deep for pity. "After that, I didn't have a reason to play for anyone else. Music was the one thing in my life that was just ours." A silence settled again, different this time, softer, heavier. Arthur cleared his throat. "Thomas, I know some people at the conservatory. If you wanted—" Thomas shook his head. "Thank you, sir, but I'm not looking for a stage. I play when I need to remember her. That's enough." The guests shifted, discomfort mixing with awe. Eleanor found herself stepping closer, something in her unraveling. "I'm sorry," she said, the words tasting unfamiliar. "For what?" Thomas asked. "For—" She trailed off, eyes lowering. "Thinking I knew who you were after only looking at you." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "Most people do. It's easier than asking." She felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "You were right," she admitted. "I wanted to humiliate you. And now?" She hesitated. "Now I don't know." Thomas gave a faint, almost tired smile. "That's progress." Arthur looked between them, sensing something private unfolding, and quietly stepped back into the crowd. The room began to fill again with soft conversation, the evening slowly resuming, but the air had shifted. No one looked at Thomas the same way anymore. Eleanor stayed a moment longer. "You know," she said quietly, "I wasn't serious about the marriage thing." "I know," Thomas said, "and I wasn't playing for you." The words weren't sharp, but they landed heavy, and she understood, truly understood, that for Thomas this night wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about holding on to something that mattered to him more than her opinion ever could. She turned to leave, but stopped, Would you play again? Not for me, for her. Thomas's eyes softened. Slowly he walked back to the piano, sat, and without another word began to play. The melody this time was different, gentler, warmer. It was the sound of a lullaby remembered across years, the sound of a boy leaning against his mother's side, the sound of love without condition. Some guests closed their eyes. Eleanor didn't move, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell hung in the air. When the final note faded, Thomas stood and returned to his mop. Eleanor felt something unfixable shift inside her, not in guilt, but in perspective. Later that night, as she stepped into her car, she glanced back through the tall glass windows of the hall. Thomas was still there alone, polishing the last stretch of marble. The piano sat in silence again, and she realized something. That all the money in the world couldn't buy the thing she had just witnessed. She would never forget the way he said it earlier, the words still echoing in her mind. I am someone, and that's where it ends. One line that lingers, one truth that can't be erased. If this story moved you, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Black Saga, for more unforgettable stories like this one. Stories that remind us of the power of humility, talent, and the quiet strength in being truly seen.